Imagine 1,000 teenagers just suddenly descending on a single city block in under an hour.
Just out of nowhere.
Right. Literally no warning. There are no leaders, no stated goals, just this sudden massive wave of chaos guided by like a ticking clock on a social media app. Welcome to the era of the teen takeover.
That's quite the phenomenon.
It really is. But hey, before we get into the actual mechanics of how this happens, I want to talk directly to you, the listener. If you are enjoying our content, please make sure to like, subscribe, follow, and to turn on that notification bell so you never miss out on our newest explorations. Your support really, really helps us keep doing what we do.
Absolutely.
Now, a really quick update on the Martin Stevens versus OpenAI matter. We want to clarify the exact details here. It is not a lawsuit. There is a voluntary quiet period requested by Martin. No progress or settlement is currently underway, and the dead man's switch is not activated, meaning Martin Stevens is physically and legally safe.
Good to have that cleared up.
Yeah, just keeping the facts straight. All right, let's dive in. Today, we are exploring this really modern paradox because juvenile crime is actually at historic lows.
Right, which surprises a lot of people.
Exactly. Yet, if you look around, cities all over the country are just panicking over these massive, sometimes really destructive teen takeovers dominating the local news. So we've got a huge stack of sources today.
We do everything from urban planning research out of Latvian University to psychological analyses from the Marketing Accountability Council.
Right. And our mission today isn't just to, gawk at the wild headlines. We are going to figure out how algorithms, 1990s political myths, and a literal lack of park benches have created this perfect storm.
And why the things we usually do to fix it, our default solutions, might actually be making the streets more dangerous.
Okay, let's unpack this. If you look at the recent reports from CNN and that MS source, the Marketing Accountability Council, the sheer scale of these events is staggering.
Oh, it's massive.
We are talking about like 100,000 teenagers suddenly appearing in the Icon Park area of Orlando, which led to widespread brawls and I think 9 arrests.
Yeah, 9 arrests.
Then you have 200 teens gathering in DC's Navy Yard, which actually escalated into gunfire and robberies. Or hundreds of kids completely flooding a mall in the Bronx, overwhelming the security staff, and just trashing stores.
It represents a fundamental fracture in the way adolescents socialize today. I mean, we aren't looking at a busy Friday night at the movies or, a traditional block party.
No, not at all.
These are flash mobs on an unprecedented scale. And they move so fast that they completely overwhelm city infrastructure before the police dispatchers even understand what they're looking at.
It's almost like they've crowdsourced a flash mob, but removed the fun dancing and added this element of riotous unpredictability. When I was reading through the sources, the only analogy that really stuck with me was hyper-aggressive guerrilla event marketing.
Oh, that's a really good way to put it.
Right. Like, these kids aren't calling each other on landlines to meet up. They are using AI-generated flyers with sleek graphics, neon text, and literal countdown clocks.
Yeah, the production value is insane.
And they keep the actual location a closely guarded secret. Then, right at the buzzer, they drop the coordinates on Snapchat or TikTok.
The guerrilla marketing comparison really hits the nail on the head, particularly when we examine the psychological engine driving this whole behavior.
What do you mean by the psychological engine?
Well, the Marketing Accountability Council report provides a brilliant breakdown of this. They anchor their analysis in psychologist Robert Cialdini's foundational theory of social proof dynamics.
Social proof. Okay, break that down for us.
So social proof essentially dictates that when human beings are uncertain about how to act, they instinctively look to the behavior of the masses.
Like looking around a room to see if everyone else is clapping before you clap.
Exactly. Now, in a digital environment, imagine being a teenager scrolling on your phone. You see this beautifully designed flyer being shared simultaneously by like hundreds of your peers, accompanied by a ticking countdown.
Right, creating that sense of urgency.
Yes, it creates an overwhelming perception of group momentum. Participation accelerates purely because everyone else appears to be participating.
It's the ultimate FOMO fear of missing out, weaponized by an algorithm. You see the clock ticking down, you see your entire digital social circle amplifying the message, and the pressure to be part of the quote-unquote event becomes almost irresistible.
And we really have to layer that intense social proof over the biological reality of the adolescent brain.
Oh, right, the brain science part of this.
Yeah. The prefrontal cortex, which is the region responsible for impulse control, complex planning, and evaluating long-term consequences, it does not fully mature until a person reaches their mid-20s.
Wow, mid-20s.
Meanwhile, The neural pathways that process peer approval and social rewards, those are hyperactive during adolescence. So we are dealing with a demographic that is neurologically wired to crave peer validation above almost everything else.
And they're operating inside these digital platforms where calm, ordinary behavior simply does not trend.
Exactly. Nobody goes viral for standing quietly in line at the food court.
Right, the incentive structure is entirely warped.
The algorithms governing platforms like TikTok and Instagram, they do not evaluate the civic value of a video. They just measure engagement velocity.
Yep.
Spectacle, disruption, and outrage are algorithmically rewarded with millions of views.
Which changes the game entirely.
It really does. When a teenager realizes they can achieve instant notoriety and massive digital visibility just by capturing chaos on their phone, the goalposts shift.
So the digital acceleration acts as like the match that lights the powder keg of this herd behavior.
Yes, and the long-term consequences, like getting a juvenile criminal record, feel so distant and abstract compared to that immediate visceral rush of digital fame.
So we have this algorithmically fueled powder keg. Naturally, my next question is how authorities are responding. Because from what I'm reading in the FOX5 and Department of Justice sources, the reaction is essentially martial law.
It is definitely a hardline approach.
In Seaside Heights, New Jersey, where they've been dealing with what they term pop-up parties, they are deploying a staggering show of force. We are talking about calling in the FBI, SWAT teams, mounted police officers on horseback, and explicitly threatening to criminally prosecute the parents of the teens involved.
Which is a huge escalation.
It's massive. And down in Washington, D.C., U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro announced incredibly aggressive enforcement measures, which was accompanied by the city council approving new, strict curfew zones. But I have to challenge this approach.
Go for it.
Do these extreme militarized crackdowns actually make the streets safer, or are they just a highly visible Band-Aid on a much deeper wound?
What's fascinating here is that the empirical data completely dismantles the narrative that these hardline crackdowns actually work.
Really? Completely dismantles it.
Totally. If we delve into this research compiled by the Marshall Project, they highlight this massive systematic review conducted by the Campbell Collaboration. And this was not just a small isolated survey.
Right.
The researchers reviewed over 7,000 distinct studies on the effectiveness of juvenile curfews. Their conclusion was definitive and honestly counterintuitive. Curfews do not reduce crime. In fact, they found that curfews slightly increase juvenile crime during the hours they are enforced.
Okay, I need to pause on that because it sounds completely backwards.
Yeah.
How does forcing kids off the street and into their homes actually cause crime to go up?
It comes down to the mechanics of urban spaces, specifically a theory pioneered by the legendary urban activist Jane Jacobs. She coined this term, eyes on the street.
Eyes on the street. Okay.
Jacobs argued that well-populated streets are inherently safe streets. When a neighborhood has a vibrant mix of, pedestrians walking dogs, shop owners sweeping their front stoops, bystanders grabbing a late-night slice of pizza.
Just regular life happening.
Exactly. When you have that, people naturally police their own environments. Criminals do not want an audience. So when a city institutes a strict curfew, they effectively mandate that the streets be emptied. They remove all those innocent bystanders and witnesses.
Which creates a vacuum. I mean, if the shop owners lock up early and the pedestrians go home to avoid getting a curfew violation, the only people left on the street are the ones who don't care about breaking the law in the first place. You've essentially handed bad actors a private stage.
Precisely. And we see the devastating reality of this vacuum reflected in hard data. A 2015 study conducted in Washington, D.C. utilized ShotSpotter audio sensor data.
That's the technology that tracks the distinct acoustic sound of gunfire across city blocks, right?
That's the one. The researchers found that gunfire incidents were significantly more frequent during the exact hours when the juvenile curfew was in effect. Entering the streets removed that crucial deterrent effect of crowds.
Wow. So if the data from 7,000 studies shows curfews fail, and audio sensors prove they might literally invite more gunfire, why are they still the default political response for so many cities?
To understand that paradox, we really have to look impartially at the historical context outlined in our sources. And just to be clear for you listening, we aren't taking political sides here. We're just looking strictly at the historical timeline provided in the source material.
Right, just reporting the facts of how we got here.
Exactly. So the heavy reliance on curfews really exploded in the 1990s, and it was driven by a sweeping bipartisan panic over a predicted wave of violent juvenile crime. A Princeton professor named John DiIulio published this highly influential theory warning of a coming generation of, quote, super predators.
Super predators, that is a heavy term.
It is. He essentially claimed that America was about to be overrun by an army of young, remorseless, homicidal criminals who grew up entirely devoid of moral grounding.
I remember that. It was a massive cultural talking point at the time, dominating newscasts and political debates across the board.
It absolutely dominated the discourse. The sources note that this theory prompted leaders across the political spectrum to demand incredibly strict measures. For instance, in 1996, then First Lady Hillary Clinton referenced this super predator concept during a speech, stating that society needed to bring them to heel.
So it was really a universal panic.
Yeah, and the direct result of that panic was a massive legislative shift toward tough-on-juvenile crime policies, which included the widespread, sweeping adoption of curfews in major cities.
But the super predator thing never actually happened, right?
No, it was a phantom. It never materialized. In fact, juvenile crime rates peaked in 1996 and have been steadily, sharply declining ever since. Today, juvenile crime is at historic lows.
Yet we still have these laws on the books.
Right. These 1990s-era curfew laws remain codified, and politicians frequently reactivate them whenever a teen takeover makes the evening news. And as the data from cities like Denver demonstrates, these reactivated curfews end up disproportionately targeting and criminalizing minority youth for the simple act of being outside.
Even though actual crime is dropping. Exactly. So we are basically using a debunked 1990s playbook to fight a 2020s algorithmic phenomenon. That is wild. But if sweeping curfews are an outdated response that only empties the streets for actual criminals, we have to look at the other side of the equation. Where are these teenagers supposed to go?
It is the big question.
The Supporter Report source introduces a vital concept here called third spaces. A third space is somewhere that isn't your home, which is your first space, and isn't your school or your workplace, the second space.
Right, it's that neutral territory.
Exactly. It's supposed to be a place for recreation, socializing, and simply existing in the community. And what struck me most in the sources were the voices of the youth themselves. Jaqueza Thomas, who serves on the Mayor's Youth Commission in Chicago, explicitly stated that kids are migrating downtown because their own neighborhoods are severely underserved and underfunded.
They just don't have the resources.
They lack basic recreational resources, no community centers, no safe parks, no programs. So they head to the city center just to have a good time. And down in Atlanta, high school students Devin Mitchell and Hale Irving pointed out that traditional third spaces, like shopping malls, have instituted incredibly strict chaperone rules.
Which completely changes the vibe of a mall.
Yeah. They argue that these policies instantly treat teenagers as suspicious criminals rather than just regular adolescents hanging out. You know what we used to fondly call mall rats.
Yeah, being a mall rat used to just be a normal phase of growing up.
Right. But I do have to push back here, playing devil's advocate for a moment. We cannot ignore the very real danger that sometimes accompanies these massive gatherings. People are getting hurt. I mean, a tourist was literally shot in the arm during a teen takeover in Chicago's Streeterville neighborhood.
It's true, the danger is definitely real.
We can't just let chaos rule the commercial districts in the name of kids needing a place to hang out. There has to be a line, right?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, your concern is completely valid. The violence is real, the property damage is real, and the fear felt by residents in those communities is entirely justified. But the way our current system polices that danger often creates a vicious, self-perpetuating cycle of systemic tension.
How so?
Well, the RAND Corporation put together a police-youth relations dialogue scenario that maps out the exact mechanics of how this friction escalates into a full-blown crisis.
Walk us through that mechanism. How does a community get from a group of kids looking for a hangout spot to a violent breakdown in trust?
It generally begins when a community experiences a localized spike in crime, maybe a string of robberies or vandalism. In response, police departments naturally increase their presence in the area and begin executing high volumes of minor stops.
What kind of minor stops?
We are talking about stopping teenagers for jaywalking, riding bikes on the sidewalk, or just demanding identification from kids standing on a corner.
Just really low-level stuff.
Exactly. And to the teenagers, who are already feeling pushed out of malls and public parks, these minor stops are perceived as intense, targeted harassment. They feel they are being policed simply for existing.
Which builds a lot of resentment.
A deep reservoir of it.
Yeah.
Then, in the RAND scenario, you add a spark to the dry tinder. An example they give is leaked text messages from officers discussing minority youth in disrespectful ways, making assumptions about their upbringing or character.
Oh man, that would just destroy any goodwill.
That leak shatters whatever fragile trust existed between the youth and the city. Finally, Tensions boil over during everyday encounters, often with school resource officers. A minor act of teenage defiance or disrespect escalates rapidly into the use of physical force and an arrest.
And then the community erupts.
Exactly. Protests begin, demanding the removal of police from schools, and the relationship between the youth and the civic infrastructure is completely broken.
It's a cascading failure of trust on all sides, where every action reinforces the other side's worst assumptions. But how do we interrupt that cascade? Because according to the CBS News report, Chicago is attempting something entirely new on the ground, bypassing that traditional riot gear response.
Yeah, they're launching a first-of-its-kind proactive approach. Instead of waiting for a crowd to form and then sending in SWAT teams to disperse them, city agencies are partnering directly with neighborhood community-based organizations.
So they're bringing the community in on the ground level.
Exactly. They are targeting places where teens naturally congregate, like Ogden Plaza in the Streeterville neighborhood. The mechanics of this intervention are fascinating. When intelligence suggests a large gathering is forming, representatives from these community groups don't show up with batons.
What do?
They walk alongside city officials directly into the crowd, wearing high-visibility shirts. They talk to the kids person to person. They explain the curfew rules calmly, but they pair that enforcement with opportunity. They offer resources, community involvement flyers, and information on summer job programs.
So treating them like people, not a threat.
The entire goal is to de-escalate the anger and teenage angst before anyone gets defensive or arrested. As the deputy mayor for community safety explained, the objective is to educate the teens on how to safely occupy the public square rather than criminalizing them just for showing up.
That represents a massive philosophical shift. Instead of treating the youth as an invading army, you treat them as citizens who need guidance. But this entire conversation highlights a glaring physical blind spot in our modern cities. I kept thinking about this while digesting the urban planning research from Latvia University, or LDTU.
Oh, their research is incredible.
It really is. We have engineered this bizarre infrastructure gap. We build these perfectly safe, brightly colored, heavily padded sandboxes and playgrounds for toddlers. We invest millions in them. But once a kid hits 11 or 12 years old, the infrastructure just vanishes.
It just disappears overnight.
We suddenly expect adolescents to either sit quietly with their hands folded on a park bench like retired adults or, pony up for a $6 coffee to justify occupying space in a cafe. We literally do not build spaces for the in-between years.
That is a profound structural failure, and it is exactly the problem the researchers at LBTU are trying to solve. They argue that public space is a necessary developmental stage for adolescents.
A developmental stage.
Yes. Teenagers fundamentally need a physical environment to test themselves, to test their boundaries, to navigate complex social hierarchies, and to practice being adults in a community setting.
Which you can't do if you're not allowed to exist anywhere.
Exactly. When we refuse to provide that stage, their natural biological desire for challenge and interaction gets pushed into unsuitable ad hoc areas, like busy intersections or commercial malls, which adults then swiftly label as vandalism, loitering, or a takeover.
Let's get into the mechanics of that design, because obviously a bigger swing set isn't the answer. How do you actually design a public space that appeals to the psychology of a teenager?
The LBTU research isolates specific psychological and physical design needs that are honestly almost universally ignored. First, teenagers require semi-enclosed spaces. They want to be in areas that are central and well-frequented by the public, but they desperately need the illusion of privacy.
It's the illusion of privacy. That makes so much sense.
Right. They need spaces, perhaps shielded by strategic landscaping or low walls, where they feel hidden from direct adult supervision. This psychologically protects them, allowing them to relax and emotionally release without feeling scrutinized.
I remember that exact feeling. You want to be out in the world, visible to your peers, but you absolutely do not want your parents or anyone looking like a parent staring at you while you figure out how to socialize.
It's a very vulnerable time. And the researchers also highlight a fascinating physical need for what they call support points. If you observe teenagers, they rarely just sit politely on the seat of a bench.
True, they always sit on the backrest.
Yes, they sit up high on the backrest with their feet on the seat, or they lean against corners, brick walls, and light poles. Designing public spaces with these varied physical support structures allows them to feel physically anchored and emotionally secure while they are hanging out.
That is such a specific, universally recognizable detail. The posture of a teenager is literally different from an adult. But what about the types of activities we're building for? Because when a city council announces they're building a teen space, they usually just pour a massive concrete skate park, cut a ribbon, and call it a day.
And that brings up a critical gender nuance that the LBTU researchers identified as a major flaw in modern urban planning. Our current urban design heavily favors adolescent boys.
Because of the skate parks.
Skate parks, basketball courts, football pitches. Cities build these all the time, and they are fantastic for physical development and burning off energy, but they are inherently competitive, performative spaces, and they completely ignore the needs of adolescent girls.
I hadn't even thought of that.
The research shows that teenage girls are generally less inclined toward these highly competitive, hypervisible physical spaces. They require landscape elements that provide opportunities for creative activities. They need open plazas where they can roller skate or walk without fear of being hit by a stray basketball or mobbed by aggressive games.
So it's about making space for different types of socializing.
Exactly. Most importantly, girls need installations designed specifically for dialogue. They need places where they can sit face-to-face, talk freely, and test out ideas or share secrets without the fear of making a mistake in front of a massive judging crowd. When we only build basketball courts and skate parks, we are systematically excluding half of the youth population from the public square.
So what does this all mean? If we look at the entire journey we've taken today, from the viral flash mobs to the park benches, we are witnessing a massive, destructive collision of three different forces.
Three major intersecting failures.
Right. First, you have a digital attention economy that actively rewards and monetizes teenage chaos. It pushes kids to create massive spectacles for algorithms that couldn't care less about their futures or their safety.
The gasoline on the fire.
Exactly. Second, you have a legal and political system that is still relying on debunked 1990s-era myths about super predators. We are cracking down with SWAT teams and curfews that the Campbell collaboration data proves actually enter the streets and invite more crime.
Right. Policies that literally backfire.
And finally, you have a physical architectural world that has simply stopped building spaces for youth to exist, leaving them with nowhere to go without being treated as a loitering threat.
It is the definition of a perfect storm. We have systematically dismantled their physical spaces, we have criminalized their presence in the spaces that remain, and then we handed them a digital device that rewards them with dopamine and fame for tearing it all down.
Which leaves us with a final, really vital question for you to consider as you go about your day. If we continue to design our public squares to explicitly exclude the next generation, where else will they turn to figure out who they are other than the most toxic corners of the internet?
It's a scary thought.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this exploration today. Please remember to like, subscribe, follow, and turn on the notification bell so you can join us for our next deep dive. See you next time.